At the age of 16, being home alone overnight was an exciting milestone. My parents had just started trusting me to stay by myself, with the only rule being that I couldn't leave the house or have anyone over. But I was fine with that. There was something exhilarating about blasting music and playing video games without my dad telling me to turn it down. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in, and I sat outside for a while, watching the lightning, enjoying the cozy feeling it brought. After a while, I moved my Xbox from my room to the downstairs den, where my dad's huge flat-screen TV and Bose sound system were set up. The only time I got to play on that setup was when I was home alone, and I loved it. The den was a half-flight down from the living room, and had a door leading to the backyard, which made it a little more secluded. I was deep into a multiplayer game of Call of Duty with my friend Ben when the doorbell rang. It was past 9 p.m., so I wondered if it was my parents coming home early, but they always had their keys. I paused the game and went upstairs to check, asking who was there. A male voice on the other side said, "I need to use a phone. I wasn't sure what to do, so I didn't answer, and instead went back downstairs." I told Ben about it, and his reaction was one of confusion and concern, saying, "Yo, what the hell?" He agreed that I shouldn't open the door. The doorbell rang again a few moments later, but I ignored it, hoping whoever it was would leave. Eventually, the bell stopped ringing, and I settled back into the game, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. But just as I was starting to relax, I heard a sound to my right and turned to see the back door closing. A tall man stepped inside. It wasn't my dad, it was a stranger. My heart raced as I dropped the controller and scrambled for the office door, yanking the headset from the controller as I ran. I slammed the office door behind me and locked it. No sooner had I locked the door than the handle started shaking violently as the man tried to open it. The office had two doors, one led to the den, and the other to the garage. My only chance of escaping was through the garage, but before moving, I froze, listening to what was happening on the other side of the door. Seconds felt like hours as the man knocked and said, "Little boy, I just need to use your phone. I'm stranded out here in the rain." His voice grew angrier with each passing moment, and his knocks turned to pounding. He yelled, "Open the damn door, you little brat!" The sound of him trying to break the door down made my stomach drop. I had no choice but to make a break for it. I pressed the button to open the garage door, praying the sound wouldn't give me away. It opened slowly and loudly, but I crawled under it as soon as it was halfway up and ran out into the storm. I sprinted down the street to my neighbor Steve's house, hoping I wouldn't see anyone following me. Steve opened the door just as I rang the bell, and I practically collapsed into his arms, begging for help. His wife, Karen, came out, confused by my frantic state, but when I told them about the break-in, their expressions changed immediately. Steve got the police on the phone, and we waited, tense, for what felt like an eternity until the officers finally arrived. I went outside to meet them, telling them everything I had told Steve. They asked which door had been unlocked, and I pointed to the garage. Two officers went through the garage and into the house, and after a few minutes, they returned with a man in handcuffs. They made sure I didn't see his face as he was placed in the police car. The police asked if I knew the man, and I told them I didn't. The man had been yelling that this was his house and I was his son, but I could tell from his disoriented state that he was either drunk, high, or just unstable. He was taken to jail, and my parents were contacted about how they wished to proceed. My parents pressed charges, and the man, identified as John McCarthy, was charged with criminal trespassing. Even though he was behind bars, I couldn't shake the unease knowing that one day he would be out. The thought that he might return still haunted me, but I tried to convince myself it had been a random encounter, not a targeted attack on our home. It seemed like a chance incident, and I didn't believe he had been after me or our house specifically. After his release, he never came back, but the memory of that night stuck with me. Even years later, I can't forget how close things came to turning out differently. In August of 2018, my partner Anna and I were winding down on a rainy night in our farm home in rural Buckingham, Iowa. We had spent our lives immersed in the farm life, and the isolation was something we had always embraced. Our closest neighbors, Jack and Larry, lived about half a mile away in opposite directions. Being farmers too, they were usually around, and we often gathered for drinks, dinners, and games. This evening was no different. Jack and his wife Susan had come over, and we were enjoying board games and a few drinks. By 11 p.m., they headed home, and Anna and I were feeling the effects of the wine. We decided to watch a movie on the couch, likely to doze off in each other's arms before heading to bed. But as the movie played on, there was an unexpected knock at the front door. Now, knocks this late at night were unusual. Living out here, we rarely had visitors, especially after dark. As the knock came again, we strained to hear a faint voice on the other side. I turned the volume down on the TV, and we waited. Moments later, there was another set of knocks, followed by the voice again, muffled, but clear enough to say, "We need help." I started to get up to answer the door, but Anna grabbed my arm and shook her head. Her face looked unsettled, and I could sense her growing concern. I whispered to her, "I'm just going to ask who it is." She whispered back, "I don't think we should open the door. They might already know we're here." Still uneasy but wanting to help, I walked over and asked through the door, "Who is it?" The voice on the other side sighed in relief, saying, "Oh, thank God. Can you open up? We're lost." I asked, "Who's we?" And the voice replied, "My wife and I." I paused, then asked, "Can your wife say something?" There was silence, followed by a "yeah. But she's not with me right now." A chill ran through me. Something about the voice didn't sound right. It was too high-pitched, like a man trying to soften his tone. I laughed nervously and said, "Is that you, Jack?" Jack was known for his antics, and after a few drinks, I figured he might be trying to prank us. But when the voice responded in a slightly deeper tone, my relief faded quickly. It didn't sound like Jack anymore. Then I asked, "What's your wife's name?" The voice responded with something odd. "That's a trick question." That's when the alarm bells really went off in my head. I stepped back from the door, moving toward my phone to call Jack, but Anna was already on edge. "We need to call the police," she urged. I tried to reassure her, telling her I'd confirm with Jack first. I dialed Jack's number, and after a few rings, he answered. "Hey, are you at my front door right now?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "No." "Why?" Jack responded. "Someone's knocking, saying they're lost, but I don't buy it. They're trying to trick me into opening the door." Jack said he'd hurry over, and we hung up. As I waited, the knocks continued, but I didn't open the door. I shouted through the door, "I have a shotgun, and I'm not afraid to use it. Leave now." The voice replied, "We're just trying to use a phone. That's all we need." Anna immediately called 911, though we both knew it would take a while for the police to reach us in this rural area. Then we heard footsteps, multiple sets moving around the house. I peeked out a window and saw shadows moving on the deck. Suddenly, there was the unmistakable sound of someone trying to lift one of the windows. Anna screamed, and I followed suit, shouting, "Get the hell out of here, or I'll shoot." I ran upstairs to grab my shotgun from the closet, all the while hearing more footsteps around the house. Seconds later, we heard George's voice from outside, yelling, "Open up." I rushed to the door and opened it, allowing George and his shotgun inside. He had arrived as quickly as he could, but after explaining that he hadn't seen anyone around, he stayed with us until the police arrived. The officer conducted a brief scan of the property but found no signs of anyone lurking nearby. Afterward, he advised us to install cameras around the house for security, something we had never considered before. The entire experience still gives me chills. It's hard to shake the thought that the only thing keeping whoever was out on our deck that night from getting inside was a wooden door. The fear of what could have happened if things had gone differently lingers with me, even now. In 2022, after a series of arguments with my dad, I decided to sublet a small cabin for a few months to escape. I needed some space to clear my head. The cabin was tucked away at the end of a dirt road, nestled between a few other similar-sized houses. The entire area had an isolated, almost forgotten feel to it, and although the place seemed like the perfect retreat, there was something about it that felt off. The cabin itself was small but cozy, with a quirky layout. The bedroom was upstairs, accessed by a hatch door in the floor, and there was a small living space and kitchen downstairs. The cabin was rented out month to month, which was ideal for my situation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet and far enough away from everything, or so I thought. For the first couple of weeks, everything was normal. I got settled in, made it my own, and would usually work 12-hour shifts. When I came home, tired and worn out, I'd make a quick snack, usually a peanut butter sandwich, and fall asleep while watching TV. The house was small, but comfortable enough. I found the solitude relaxing, but after a few weeks, something strange started happening. It began with faint sounds, little creaks in the floorboards or the walls. At first, I dismissed them as just the house settling, a normal part of living in an old cabin. But then, the noises became harder to ignore. Every night, I would hear things moving downstairs, scraping sounds, like something was being dragged across the floor. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination or maybe the wind, but the sounds didn't stop. They became more distinct, like footsteps, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, echoing through the house. It was always from the basement. I tried to ignore it at first. I'd pull the blankets over my head or distract myself by watching TV louder, but the noises just kept coming. One night, I could hear what sounded like something scratching at the walls, faint but persistent. I froze. My heart raced, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next night, the noises started again. I couldn't sleep, and I found myself staring at the hatch door in the floor. It had always made me uneasy, even though it was the only way to access the basement. I'd always made sure to close it tightly at night, but the thought of something or someone down there made my skin crawl. The noises were louder this time, sharper, like something was pacing around, or maybe even scratching at the floor. It was unsettling. I decided I had to check it out. I couldn't keep ignoring it. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to peer down into the basement through the hatch. The house was silent except for the faint thudding sound from below. My hand trembled as I reached to open the door. I could hear the creaking of the old wood beneath me. I hesitated but finally pulled the door open and stepped into the small staircase that led to the basement. The air was damp, cold, and heavy with an uncomfortable stillness. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. As I descended the stairs slowly, I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The basement was pitch black, except for the faint light from my phone's flashlight. My breath felt shallow, and I could hear the thumping in my ears. The noise from below grew louder as I descended, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. A dark, moving shadow that didn't belong. It wasn't a person. It was too still, too wrong. It sent a chill through me that I can't describe. I froze. My mind couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. My stomach churned. With a burst of adrenaline, I slammed the hatch door shut and bolted upstairs. My mind was racing. I locked every door and window in the cabin, but the feeling of dread didn't leave. I was alone, and there was something in the basement. The rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I packed up as quickly as I could, intending to leave for good. I left the cabin and never came back. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but I know one thing for sure: that shadow in the basement was something I never wanted to encounter again. The memory still lingers, haunting me when I least expect it. I don't think I'll ever feel safe in a place like that again. And as for the cabin, I'm certain that whatever was in that basement is still down there, lurking in the dark.